Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction where the Russians continue offensive operation. As you can see, we have lots of icons from this area, and as you can see, we have lots of icons that show us the fire anomalies. First, let's talk about the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. As you can see, this area is under very heavy fire, which means most likely that the Russians are about to begin another wave of offensive operation in direction of Velika Novoselovka and Vremivka tactical bridgehead. At least the concentration of fire tell us that there is something like fire preparation before the beginning of the full-scale offensive, so let's wait a little bit. Maybe something big is going to happen in the very near future. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Prichistovka. We have another area with the heavy fire anomalies. A big number of fire anomalies were discovered between the cities of the Novoukrainka, Prichistovka, and Ugledar and Novomayorsk. So as you can see in front of your screen, the satellite picture, and we can clearly see the fire anomalies around these cities. Furthermore, as for Prichistovka itself, if you remember, yesterday we were talking that according to pro-Russian sources and pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians began full-scale offensive operation in direction of the village, and as a result of attack, the Russians managed to establish around 50% control over the settlement. And later we got additional details from pro-Ukrainian sources. First, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians attacked the village with 8 armored vehicles. They didn't clarify the number of personnel that was involved in this operation, but later the Ukrainians provided us additional information, and they reported that the Russians were using not 8 personal carriers but up to 12 armored vehicles and personal carriers, and the Russians were using up to 100 soldiers of stormtroopers. So as a result of clashes, as you can see, according to different mappers, according to neutral mappers, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians established almost complete control over the village. Telling the truth, according to different mappers, the Russians control around 60% of the village, and the rest 40% either in the gray zone or is in contested area. So I believe that today we're gonna start receiving first geolocations for us, first updates, and then we will color the village in Russian favor. And the question is, what is the next Russian step? Either to move further in the western direction towards the village of Zolotaya Niva, or the Russians would try to cross the river of Kashlygach and to attack in the northern direction with the purpose to capture the village of Ukrainka. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Ugledar area. During the previous night, of the local time, another fire anomalies were discovered. There are very heavy clashes, as you can see. According to this picture, the Russians are bombing the Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of Ugledar itself and a little bit to the north in this stronghold, so trying to cut the main supply roads. As for the coal mine itself, if you remember, yesterday we were talking that the Russians captured some buildings in this area, and according to different mappers, during the previous 12 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions, and currently the Russians control around 60% of the coal mine territory. Very interesting details are coming from the village of Vadiana. First of all, according to Ukrainian sources, the Russians launched a full-scale offensive in direction of this village as well. The Russians, as for the village of Vadiana, were using up to 4 personnel carriers with a known number of stormtroopers, and later the pro-Ukrainian sources colored at least 40% of the village of Vadiane as contested or as a gray zone. So most likely the Russians did enter the village. Currently they're conducting the clearing operation. So as you can see, most likely during the next 24 hours we're going to receive significant number of updates in Russian favor. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kurakhova direction. We continue receiving significant number of satellite pictures of fire anomalies, and the main fire anomalies are discovered and spotted in the area of Ostrivsky and Kurakhova, so very big fire, as you can see, and another concentration of fire anomalies we can find in the northern part of the city by the name of Ukrainsk, and very heavy fire anomalies can be spotted in the western part of Mikhailovka. So basically the entire direction was set on fire by the Russians and the Ukrainians as a result of offensives. Now let's talk about additional changes on the ground. According to very reliable Russian sources, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to move through the village of Galicinovka and to enter the village of Novosizhelana Pershen. According to the Russians, around 50% is already under complete Russian control. Yet we haven't received any confirmation from any of the mappers, and we haven't received any geolocation that can confirm this, but most likely, if the source posts the information like this, most likely today we're going to receive additional updates. Furthermore, according to different mappers, the Russians continue moving further in the southern direction from Dolinovka, and the Russians captured additional 3 lines in the fortifications towards the city of Girnik. As for Ukrainsk, if you remember yesterday, we were talking a lot about the Russian attempts to attack the village, and that the Russians have already entered the north and the northeastern part of the city, but yet we haven't received anything that can confirm this. The only thing we have is the very huge and big fire anomaly in the northern part of Ukrainsk, which most likely the area that the Russians were bombing and preparing before another assault operation, and we have some changes on the ground according to different mappers. So these 3 lines, this road, this part of the road, these 3 lines in these fortifications were captured by the Russians as a result of clashes during the previous 12 hours. As for Selidova direction, we start receiving a lot of updates, but telling the truth, most of them are coming from the village of Mikhailovka. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocation that confirms Russian presence and Russian control over Selidova itself, over the eastern part or either the central part or something like this. We have some changes on the ground according to neutral mappers, and neutral mappers confirm that the Russians established complete control over the central hospital, but once again no geolocations were provided. As for the geolocations, the Ukrainian sources continue publishing lots of videos of clashes that have been taking place since the 28th of August till the 1st of September. In this video we can see the Russian tank that was attacking the Ukrainian position somewhere around the 30th of August, and the Ukrainians, as a result of FPV drone attacks or anti-tank missile strikes, managed to destroy the Russian tank completely. Along the M30 road, we can see another Russian tank that was attacking the Ukrainian positions, and that was also destroyed, most likely as a result of FPV drone strikes or maybe as a result of anti-tank missile. And so, as you can see, lots of vehicles were destroyed during the battles during the first stage of Selidova offensive. In this video, we can see the Russian soldiers. We will not watch the video till the end, but if you have access to map, you can take a look at this video, and in this video you might see the significant number of Russian soldiers who were moving from one building to another. Obviously, the village of Mikhailovka was completely captured by the Russians. It depends, of course, on the real border of this village, but at least 90-80% is already under the Russian control. As for Selidov itself, still nothing. Let's wait for additional updates. Now let's move to Novogrodovka. We have another fire anomaly in the northwestern part of the city in this area. So maybe the Russians still haven't managed to establish complete control over the territory. Maybe there are still some islands of resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine. So the Russians continue conducting the clearing operation. And now let's move further. Let's talk about Mirnograd. According to information we have, the Ukrainians have redeployed their let's say police detachment Safari. It's like crazy guys whose main purpose is to terrorize the let's say civilians in the local population, to have everything under control. And the Russians are saying that as a result of Iskander strike, their concentration of these forces was destroyed, damaged, and this detachment suffered significant losses. Now let's move further and let's talk about very important thing. I have added an icon of the Iskander. So according to information we have, the Russians improved their production of the Iskander missiles so much, so now every single brigade, sometimes even some battalions, have their own Iskander detachments, Iskander unit in their battalion or in their brigade, and this allowed the Russians to shorten the time of making decision before discovering the target and making Iskander strike. And as you can see, for the previous few days we received significant number of Iskander strikes, and mainly the number of strikes and accuracy connected completely with the fact that almost every single unit received this Iskander soldiers in their team. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction. We have some changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians managed to secure completely the railways between Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye and Andreevka. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning and the Russians and attacking the Russian soldiers who were moving along the railways, which confirms complete control over the territory, and we have additional progress on the ground in the Chasiv Yar itself. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russian soldiers in this part of the Chasiv Yar, which confirms complete control over additional streets in this area. As for the Siversk direction, we haven't received anything, just small updates in around Bilogorovka. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were hunting and attacking the Russian forces who were moving through the fields, and this video confirmed complete control over the territory by the Russians. If you remember, this small salient used to be in contested area, but now, as you can see, we have 100% proofs of Russian control over the territory. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions and got as close as possible to the villages and the cities along the Oskol River. And currently, if we calculate the distance between the possible Russian edge positions and the village of Glushkovka itself, the current distance is less than 2.5 kilometers, which is obviously very, very close, and which means that a few more kilometers, 1 more kilometer to the west, and the Russians will be able to begin full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to cut this territory in two. If the Russians are able to cut this territory in two, then they will be able to handle with the every single direction separately. Now let's move further. According to information we have, during the previous night, the Russians conducted massive Iskander strike. Once again, the topic about Iskanders, and the number of Iskanders is significant, and furthermore, according to information we have, in the very near future, Iran is planning to provide the Russians additional missiles of Iskander type, and that means that almost maybe every single platoon is going to have their own Iskander system, which will increase the number of losses from the armed forces of Ukraine and the time the Russians require to make a decision, which is very important in the next upcoming phase of the special military operation. Now let's talk about the Kursk direction, where we have a lot of changes on the ground. First, let's talk about the area between Martinovka and Ruska Konopelka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor. The Russian sources published significant number of videos of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces, and of course most of these episodes were geolocated, and based on the geolocations we have adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor. Now let's go back on map, and according to all these videos, all these episodes and scenes, we have added this part to the west of Martinovka, and we have added at least 50% of Ruska Konopelka and the complete Ukrainian control. In this video we can see the Russian FPV drone who was attacking the Ukrainian vehicle that was moving to the mainland. Probably they were moving some wounded or evacuating wounded or something like this. This FPV drone attack took place exactly in this point. Based on this video we have adjusted this part of Ruska Konopelka in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further. We start receiving additional updates from the Korenevo region. This is the area where the Russians are counterattacking. In this video we can see Russian attempts to counterattack the Ukrainian positions along the railways. The Russian 2 personal carriers arrived in the area, the infantry landed, and they began clearing the forest. So this video confirms at least complete control over the railways, and this on the one side, but on the other hand we see that most likely there are still some presence of armed forces of Ukraine between the village of Zhuravli and the railways. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russian soldiers inside of Olgovka, which confirms additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation, and that they managed to restore control over additional buildings and streets in this small village. And let's move to the Belarus, to the Republic of Belarus. According to information we have, the Belarusian forces continue concentration of their military units along the border. For now we're not sure whether Belarusians are planning to start any offensive, but anyway, This situation forced the Ukrainians to keep their forces on the border as well. And today we got some additional reports about the nuclear weapon. The Russians redeployed their nuclear command centers to Crimea. You remember that according to information we have, the Russians are right now working to improve their nuclear doctrine, and most likely they will improve the number of cases when they can use the nuclear weapon. And most likely for these purposes the Russians brought the nuclear command centers to Crimea just as a part of improvements of their nuclear doctrine. Furthermore, the sources reported that the Russians are about to finish the construction of ground launching systems also for the nuclear weapon. So telling the truth, summarizing everything, the Russians are improving their nuclear weapon and nuclear carriers massively all over the entire Russia, and they're improving their doctrine. So it seems that the Russians are really planning to use nuclear weapon in the conflict with Ukraine, or at least they're planning to use this if Western countries cross the final red line, and we're talking about the border with Ukraine. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.